Hello, everybody. We are back here, and we are back with Sarah Salter-Kelly. And if you haven't checked out Sarah's episode, Sarah is the episode that is out currently for our trauma series. So go to the Inspire Health podcast and check that out. We had
Trauma as Medicine.
Yeah, our Trauma as Medicine series. And we had
series, episode.
Well, series. Trauma as Medicine.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. We actually thought when we read your book, we were thinking that actually was the perfect name for this whole series. It was funny. The series is the Trauma Recovery Series, From Surviving to Thriving. But when we actually came across your book, we're like, oh, that would have been a really amazing name for the whole series, because Trauma as Medicine. So we thought that was really brilliant. So Sarah, welcome back. So great to have you here for the live Q&A. And anybody out there, feel free to post questions that you've got for Sarah, and we will try to answer some of them along with some of the others that came in during her episode.
And let us know also where you're joining from, and we love to know where people are tuning in from different parts of the world as well.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm really excited to be back with you guys, and that's a perfect introduction. Trauma as Medicine, to the trauma series, to however we can find a means to address and be with trauma. And what a brilliant way to put all of these speakers together to offer people resources and tools.
All right, let me just pull up your book here too for a sec so that people can see what we're talking about when we say trauma as medicine.
And even when Jay was reviewing your book and reading it out loud and trying to compile a list of questions for you, Sarah, I think it was 3 pages in, and he had like a full page of questions. Like it's so meaty. There's so much content in there to sit with, to digest, to work through. And I feel like even with this current time that we're in, oftentimes we get caught up in, well, what's going to happen? What's going on in the political scene? What's going to happen tomorrow? Can we check out the psychics? Can we check out the channelers? But it's like, ultimately, I feel like time and again, we're called back to doing inner work, like the most meaningful way that we can actually contribute to a collective shift is to pay attention to our own individual path and journey and work on that as our own contribution to that collective shift taking place.
Absolutely, particularly if we come from the mindset that whatever is happening outside of us to some degree is a reflection of what's happening inside of us. And so we can feel powerless when we're attempting to address the big picture because it's so overwhelming and it's so much and we don't even know where to start. Whereas if we direct our focus internally and we consider any of our own inner conflicts or our own inner traumas that have not yet been tended to, it helps us to recognize where we can go in a way that we have some level of control and direction.
Hi, Bella. Thanks for joining in. And Sarah, on that note, so then we talk about what the reflection is when something's going on outside and that's a reflection of what's going on inside. I wholeheartedly agree that often that is taking place. Given what's been going on, say, over the last year, how can people make sense of that? Where would be a starting place for them to try to understand this, what is going on outside and how that can be a reflection of what's happening inside?
I think that's a really good question, and that I can offer, it's such a big question, right? So I can offer a humble sense of my own experience, and very much I've scrambled and questioned and pondered that in the journey of the last year. And how I view our collective experience is that on some level, if we take all of the energy of all of the humans, of the whole planet, of all of life, we can recognize that the experience of the pandemic has somehow been generated through our collective, whether it's our collective conflicts, our collective pain or suffering, that somehow that we're a life force is what I'm trying to say, is that we're all one life force. So there's some sort of reason in what's happening. And if there's some sort of reason in what's happening, then it's possible for us to sit and be with what's unfolding and do our own inner inquiry on the individual level to contemplate how it can be a part of who we are evolving into. And of course, all of those experiences are going to be individual, and they might be contrary to each other, and they are both right. and then somehow that's part of the beautiful thing of being humans and being a part of this experience.
Yeah, we're going to, I think as far as for buffering for sound, we'll just make sure that we keep our audio off during your talking here. So
we just had a comment indicating that there's some buffering going on. So just when you're speaking, we're going to mute our voice just in case that's interfering in any way with the connection. And then we just have to remember to click it back on when we start.
Okay, perfect.
I think what you said there too, Sarah, is so important, because it does give room then for everybody to have their own unique experience with what's actually happening. Because I know from my perspective, whenever there's something going on in the outside, I mean, whatever, it could be simple or it could be dramatic like COVID, right? But it's like, it's going to ruffle something inside each individual, and whatever ruffles inside each individual, that is personal, right? That's unique. And so it doesn't mean that it has to ruffle the same things. Everybody can have their own unique experience. To me, it seems like the important part of it is then what do we do with that when it comes up? How do we work with that? What's it shining a light on? And that's where I feel like a lot of your book is a really, I mean, it's got a lot of wisdom in it. It's also a really practical book. One of the things that's throughout your book is different journaling exercises. And I've always been a big fan of journaling exercises for a long time. And I'm wondering if maybe you can explain sort of from your perspective, the benefit in the journaling exercises, and if there's a unique or a specific way that, that people can journal to get benefits out of it.
That's a really good question. I myself obviously have also loved the process of self-reflection and have journaled since, I was a young girl. I think I had like the cartoon Ziggy, a locked journal, I can recall. But maybe grade 3. And however, to speak to your question, one of the beautiful pieces in journaling is that we're able to find our own wisdom and our own response to something by finding the right question. I think we can get caught up in assuming we have the answers for things, and then we get stuck. Whereas if we start to use the process of self-inquiry, the process of journaling, to look at an issue from all of these different points of view, what could this actually be about for me? And what if I looked at it from this way? And why is this arising for me right now? Instead of assuming that we have the answer, it helps us to create more space inside of ourselves, to invite in a possibility that we had not yet considered. And if we're inviting in a possibility that we had not yet considered, that's where we grow. So if you contemplate, I share in my book my experience of shared humanity with my mother's perpetrator. And I did a lot of journaling around forgiveness, because I needed to know that whatever my experience of forgiveness was, it was authentic to me, and it wasn't just something I was doing because. I needed to really feel into it. So a lot of the questioning I'd ask is, what would forgiveness be like for me? If I was able to do that, what does it mean? And what does forgiveness mean? What is the impact of that on my life? And noticing the response in my body. So that's another beautiful thing with journaling, is that we can pose a question, and then we can go inwards and notice the felt sense response, and delve a little bit more into our nervous system to recognize how we're actually reacting in a way that maybe isn't cognitive.
Yeah. And I think something is there any questions you've got on that?
Well, I was just going to say, as with regards to even felt sense response, I feel like that too requires us to come to a place of calm, a bit of peace, quiet, in order to actually get a clear reflection of where that's coming from and the root of that, as opposed to static noise, static white noise that is just trying to distract us away from getting to the heart of the essence of what is truly coming up. Do you have processes or practices with regards to that, even arriving to that point?
Definitely. There's quite a few meditation exercises in the book. And I'd also say that I feel like our greatest healer is nature and time outside on the land and in the wild. And so it seems to me through my practice and through working with other people that is paramount to calming ourselves down enough sometimes to even do the meditation exercises or the journaling exercises. Because if we're in such a place of heightened anxiety or sitting down and journaling initially can feel like you're just adding to the reels in your mind, and sitting down and meditating initially can feel like you're just listening to them. And so often some sort of physical activity where you're outside in nature helps to tone that down. Like, we need the land desperately to help us in our process of healing and tapping into joy, which helps us to heal trauma. And so that, I would say, is paramount. And all of the ways in which we can address our trauma can be taken down to the simplest pieces. Going and sitting beside a river for a while and just listening to it for half an hour with nothing planned. And that can be hard because our head is like, oh, half an hour? That's a lot of time. I got things to do. We always want to quantify and measure our days so that it feels like we can justify our productivity level. Whereas if we're able to recognize the innate importance of us creating space for being, it's in that space of being that our nervous system starts to soften, and the anxiety that we pick up from the heightened state that our culture is in, not just during the pandemic, but most of the time, starts to soften. And then the meditation or reflection exercises are helpful because we're able to receive them.
Jason did an interview last year with a friend of ours, Don Christensen, and he actually received the insight that there's going to be what he classified or what he called a day of pause, where then he was on a mission to basically get everyone in on, let's create one day at least where we can just stop everything we're doing, seize productivity, and just tune in to where we are, where we want to be moving to, how we're feeling, and all of this. And what's really interesting is, even looking back to this COVID and this pandemic, I feel like this time in general has given us that opportunity that you're speaking of just pausing. And, there's a lot of things happening on a lot of different levels, but what I know personally I've been really seeking and looking for is that ultimate or that higher, that divine plan, essentially.
Totally.
Of what is going on, like that larger supreme perspective of where things are at. So like with all the nitty gritty of what's taking place, and all of it is there and has a story to tell, but I wanted to have a bigger understanding of what's the purpose of this. And I really feel like ultimately that's the gift, that's the gem within this time that we're all collectively moving through, is that ultimate time of pause to be able to, as you said, do the self-inquiry, practice the self-reflection. This time in itself is creating that space to within it to invite the possibility of healing, of expansion, of growth, of evolution.
I so feel you. I want that too. Like, and right when the pandemic first started, my immediate desire to, okay, well, what's the greater purpose? Where is God? Where is source in this? And how do I understand what's happening. And so I intentionally did a shamanic journey to connect with the spirit or energy of COVID. And what I was told was, I need to let go of everything I know. And I need to let go of my need to compartmentalize or identify or name or claim, or just let go of everything you know, and COVID will change everything you know, the whole way you look at the world. And so there was so much messages of just stop needing to know and trust in what's arising. And I think that when you consider experiences, particularly in relation to trauma, where we go into the underworld, we go into the dark, whatever the message is doesn't come until we hang out in that space for a little while, right? It's kind of like you think about the great void, or the womb of life, which often in a cycle teachings is the winter time of the year. So it's very similar to that we're in this void time period, and we're starting to slowly bring our feet into the light now. And it's more as we start to emerge, for another metaphor, like the butterfly coming out of the cocoon, as we start to emerge, there's an understanding or a felt sense of what the transformation is, but not when we're in the mush. And that's, and that's often we have to let ourselves be in it. And that, I often thought in many ways, you think about what a great impact this has had on the Mother Earth as far as the lack of pollution because of the shift in the lack of air travel, or there's been many ways that us stopping has started to create a healthy environmental impact.
You said a couple things around feeling I'd like to come back to, or I guess a couple points that I think were interesting. So when you were talking about spending time in the underworld and needing to stay long enough there, I think that's a really important distinction between, some people might say, well, I think I ruminate in the underworld all the time. So is there a difference between spending time in the underworld that is beneficial versus like bathing in it and like ruminating it, and sort of to a point that is not actually becoming beneficial anymore? You're just sort of living in that place, but not like extracting the gold from it, so to speak.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Being stuck down, tethered to the dirt. I think that what is helpful is to bring, if it's our own individual process, to bring intention to it. So if it's our own individual process and we're conscious of the fact that we are deep in the dark bowels of our own personal underworld, bringing that self-inquiry. Okay, right. Why am I here? I'm feeling really dark and miserable and depressed in relation to this issue again. How is this helping me? What do I need to learn from this? What is my piece in co-creating this? How have I drawn this into my life, and what do I need to learn from it? And so continuing to bring that questioning to the experience at hand. And if it is a experience of needing to express the victim self, then allowing for the victim self to be heard. That's totally different from being stuck in the victim self. And so we have to be our own judge of that, because it is easy to get stuck in that, and to recognize that you're still experiencing the coming undone, if you will, of how your relationship with this trauma has held you bound in the past. So you're letting yourself unravel it so you can digest it. There is intention in each moment. The unknowing is that you don't know the long-term outcome. You don't know how long you'll be hanging out in it. You just know that you're bringing your heart and your intention to identifying, acknowledging, and addressing what is needed for you to be at peace. So I do reflect on the ceremony that I created with my mother's perpetrator in my book. And that ceremony was 9 months long, once or twice a week, where I intentionally, for an hour and a half, sat down and had conversations with him. He suicided in jail, so he had passed on in 97, and I needed to express all of these feelings. I had no idea how long it would last, though. And so it's that place of, okay, I know this feeling is inside of me. You know, you close your eyes, you check in. Yeah, I'm still angry. And so I gave myself a place to express that, and then revisited it again the following week. Is that feeling still there? Well, actually, today I feel more like this. So our bodies will tell us when we've come to a place of resolution. It's letting go of our need to know exactly when that will be and what it's going to look like.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Sarah. And I think that the key take home from that for people is it really comes down to intention and awareness and being conscious of what you're doing. So you're not just maybe ruminating almost in an autopilot and getting stuck there, but bringing your attention to it, and sort of this self-responsibility, but without a blame attached to anything.
Exactly. We have to be responsible for our thoughts and for our energy. And so we can create a healthy experience of blame. There can be a healthy experience of pretending to the victim self and we were harmed, where we can scream and shout and direct that energy towards whoever hurt us in that intentional space, and then step outside of that space afterwards and contemplate, okay, well, I got that out. Do I still feel that way? I noticed when I gave myself permission to express any of the victim type energy that I had towards my mother's perpetrator, eventually it was no longer true anymore. However, I had to, and I was reluctant to do this. It took about 10 years because I didn't want to be a victim. That whole idea that, you know, it felt powerless to me. And yet the truth was something had happened that was beyond my control, and that there was a part of myself that needed me to acknowledge that in order to come to a place of healing and wholeness. So I needed to say, scream, and direct that directly towards him and say, how dare you? How could you? All of that. And then pause and feel into what was next, what was there.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I just wanted to say here that got a comment from Adam who just said he loved the discussion that we had in our episode around paganism. So we all come from an indigenous culture, and I have spent time exploring my own ancestral patterns through Celtic shamanism to facilitate healing my own trauma. Beautiful. Thanks. Thank you for sharing, Adam. And yeah, I think that's why I wanted you to discuss that in the episode, because I think sometimes people don't understand what that means, or it's been so distorted, and it's really got such a beautiful connection to earth, really, and nature.
And it simplifies everything, which the more that I study spiritual healing on any level, it seems that the simpler and simpler and simpler it actually is, right? So when we can take things down to the very basic tools, whether it's earth, water, air, and fire, or whether it's recognizing the need for a regular disciplined meditation practice, right? 20 minutes, you know, that those simple tools help us to facilitate amazing outcomes. And we can understand the elements. We can understand being on the land, and without needing to have somebody else give us instructions or tell us how to do it. So if we have any triggers around authority or dominance or being manipulated, those are eradicated when we're outside in nature, knowing that somehow the spirit of the land's actually going to tend to our wounds. What a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
I love so many things that you just brought up, Sarah, including the fact that as far as nature facilitating the healing and the expansion, and also honoring emotions. And I and I love how you said you spent 10 years kind of figuring out with your relationship even with anger and victim, and it does take time, and honoring the time that it takes based on our own journey and our own healing process. But specifically, like with emotions, I know on my own spiritual path for a long time there, anger was deemed to be not a auspicious emotion. It's not a good emotion to have, or anger, rage, irritability, frustration. Like if that's coming up, can you turn to compassion instead? Because that's a better place to be.
Let's just stop over that anger. Let's find the good emotions, right? Yeah.
which is a pretty big leap sometimes.
Right. But, you know, even when you mention spending time in nature, you know, when you are just simply observing a cloud welling up and becoming darker, and then there's the thunder and there's lightning and there's the release, when you're able to see that firsthand and you're really observing within the humility of your own beingness, and recognizing that the patterns that you see within nature are very much indicative and reflected within your own pattern as a human being, you recognize and you, in a lot of ways, feel validated by a much bigger power. And I think that's really powerful.
I feel like that's where our answers lie. One of the teachings that came to me that's similar to that was looking out into the forest and recognizing, you know, within the forest, everything fits. You have the rotted trees, you have the fungal systems and the mycelium and the bugs that are helping to take care of them, and they're becoming a part of nature as they decompose, as much as you have the little, you know, perennials and annuals and bushes and shrubs and trees. There's nothing in that system that doesn't belong, that's garbage. And when I was recognizing my experience with my trauma that I needed to take care of, it was really honing in on that reflection and seeing that none of my experiences were garbage. There was nothing, I couldn't get rid of what I didn't like from my own life's journey. My choice was to learn how to compost it and metabolize it in the same way that the fungus was breaking down the decomposting wood in the forest, is that I needed to learn how to do that within myself. And so it's deeply humbling in the analogy that you shared, and recognizing that anger can be this big thunder cloud, that we're not going to get rid of the thunder cloud. We're not going to be like, oh yeah, sorry, I only want the healing light right now. You know, get rid of that thunder shit. And, you know, we're not going to do that. You know, we're awestruck by the power of it. You know, the power of it is incredible. And so the beauty of anger is that anger is always connected to our power, and it's always connected to emotions that need to be expressed. And when we learn that, when we recognize it, it's liberating.
And I think when you connect into it, it's like, depending on where people are at, or where we're at different points in time, if I'm in a state of, say, shame or apathy, anger actually feels really good. You know, like if you touch in with your body, there's, how I think of it is that there's a different sort of level of energy with some of these different emotions. And maybe you don't want to hang out for anger, but anger can be a big motivating step with a lot of volition to it when you're stuck in a place of immobility or shame or something that almost feels like an even deeper pull down, you know, where you feel like you're getting pulled down by the ankles. Anger can be that oomph that kind of gets you up over the hump a little bit. So again, I think it's important for people to, rather than judging the different emotions when they come up, like paying attention to how they feel inside your body, and even from where you were to what is. Because what I've seen a lot of times in clinic, when I work with a lot of patients that have anxiety and depression, a lot of mental health concerns, and a lot of times people that are depressed, they usually have to phase through something that involves anger. Usually part of the healing process, there is an aspect, but what usually happens is when anger comes up, it's not very comfortable for people around them, and it's sort of then they pull it back again. So it's almost like they never allow themselves to go through the natural cycle of some of the different, I think of it like through how the nervous system needs to kind of run its course. It's almost like got stuck. And because anger is an uncomfortable one for a lot of people around them, it's sort of like, whoa, people kind of get upset about that. Then you pull it back down and you go back into this state of sort of immobility almost.
One of the things I like to do with clients, or even with raising my kids, I would do this, is to invite them to ask, what is your anger asking of you? What does your anger need? And to start to have that conversation with, why is my anger showing up? And what does it need from me? And if I was to listen to it in a way that's healthy, so I'm not, you know, if it was my kids and they were fighting, you know, you don't get to beat each other. You know, if I was to listen to it in a way that is healthy, what could that look like?
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I remember one of my teachers, Dr. David Hawkins, he would say, you get enough angry people, they can change the world, but you just don't want anger to stray over to violence and hatred, and then it doesn't do a lot of benefits.
Yeah.
We had a comment that came up from Claude. He's a friend of ours, actually. He said, should we make it a habit to thank our ancestors and the spirits surrounding us through a ritual or ceremony?
Good question. That is part of my practice. I think that it's a really important part for all of us as humans, is to recognize that interconnection, that our ancestors are with us all of the time. And the ritual or ceremony can be something formalized that, you're writing up or creating yourself, but can be really simple too. That when I go for a hike and I'm about to have my water bottle, I pour a little bit of water out on the land first and give thanks for the water, or I'll put a little bit of my food out on the land to give thanks. And I'll do that at home too. So letting whatever these rituals are to become integrated into how we live each day. How can we recognize that this may be a part of our day-to-day living, and as well as formal occasions. But if we formalize it too much, then we're not really honoring the intimate or personal day-to-day connections.
Nice. So kind of make it your own and make it real. I think of that a lot, like when I think of prayer. I think a lot of times prayer became this very formalized kind of thing rather than this just intimate connection with you and source.
Yeah, that I think for so many years,
like a friend rather than like someone up here. Talk to them like a kind of idea.
Yeah, I'm talking to God or goddess or my ancestors all the time. And I think what happened is that because many of us come from a Western culture rooted in Christianity, that there were so many political pieces put in place that meant you had to go to your priest or your minister to talk to God. And as we've come more into our own authority in relationship to the divine, we recognize that we are the ones responsible for what that relationship looks like. And it's personal and intimate, and it can be whatever we want it to be. And that's a piece that would often come up. I used to teach a 2-year shamanic training program. And part of the homework would be for people to learn how to pray, to create their own conversations with the natural world. And it was such a piece that people would struggle with. And I'd intentionally use the word prayer because it would trigger people. And, like that place of, what is your dialogue? How do you speak to what is sacred? We need, if we want to look at who we are as holy and sacred, and if we're going to look at our land as holy and sacred, then we have to be able to speak holy and sacred. And that's where we end up getting stuck, right? So we need to do that individually.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to go through?
I think I wanted to bring up, I just love that prayer. How do you speak to the sacred? Okay. I wanted to ask you to speak of our relationship with our trauma and freedom, and what that is, what that exactly looks like at this point in time.
So as individuals in our own personal trauma, or as in reflection of what's happening on our planet right now?
Maybe I think even how that even ties in.
Okay, so I'll speak of the micro, of more the personal one first, and then just see what shows up. This came up in a conversation on another show last week, and a great visual that I offered up is, if we consider that our trauma hangs out in the underworld, and I reference a more thorough description of the underworld in my earlier podcast with you guys, as well as in my book. So that territory down in the bowels of the earth that holds everything that we're afraid of, or that we haven't that is causing conflict or disappointment or loss. So if we consider that, what we haven't resolved is hanging out there, and we're tied to it, almost like there's these anchors that are wrapped around our physical body, like energy cords that are pulling us down into this place in the underworld. And anything that we have not yet had the capacity to resolve is anchored into that space. So if we are to move forward, we first must resolve the energy around each of these cords that are tethering us into the underworld. And so there's no way that we can separate ourselves from our own trauma. There's no way that we can get rid of or leave in the past what has come into our lives, because on some level, even if we don't understand why, it has shown up to offer us up an opportunity for healing and transformation. When we take the time to go into that underworld space, to resolve the energy that is inherent inside of each of those cords that are causing our bondage, we discover things about ourselves that we hadn't expected. And often it can be something simple. Like for me, it was recognizing my capacity to love and have compassion for my mother's perpetrator. And that experience of compassion, even though it arose through something like homicide, gave me the greatest sense of freedom and liberation that I wasn't anticipating. And so if we contemplate that, the ways that we're tied, if we're willing to hone in on our own power and see that we each can be accountable for healing this bondage within ourselves, that is what opens us to the greatest possibility of love and transformation within ourselves. So on a collective level, if we're to look at what's arising from our experiences of the pandemic, and instead of feel stuck or trapped or bound or angry or powerless, if we're to be curious about why this is arising for us individually, and to tune into where we do have power or control in resolving whatever issue it is that's coming up, right? Because it's brought up issues for all of us in different ways. And if we're able to reflect on, wow, instead of, I can't believe that this is happening to me, this is so-and-so's fault. I've had to say to my teenage son many times, this isn't just happening to you, because we had 2 moves also in the last 2 years. So, it's hard to make new friends at school during a pandemic. All of those different pieces to recognize this is a global experience. And where is your power, and how is it tied to what's uncomfortable for you, and what is needed for you to go into that discomfort in a way that can offer you understanding or healing?
Thank you for that.
How did that conversation go with your teenager?
There's been so many of them, let me tell you. Since we moved to Grand Forks, BC 2 months ago, we were here for his grade 9 year, and then we lived in Kelowna for 8 months, and then we just bought and came back here. So we bought him a membership at the gym, and because he has all this energy, he needs to get out. He's 16 next week, and he goes every morning, no word of a lie, at 6 o'clock before school. He goes for an hour, and so he's meeting people through the gym, and some at school. But I've also had to explain that making friends in high school often isn't easy, regardless of a pandemic, and so instead of projecting it on, the people here are assholes, or there's a lot of drama, know that that's going to happen throughout your whole life. That's always going to be there. And so you get to choose how you show up in that and what people you're going to draw into your life. And so that's a common conversation in our home.
Yeah, ours often too. Sarah, you had mentioned before, you talked about metabolizing trauma. I wonder if you could just kind of break that down for what that means for you to metabolize trauma.
Yeah. I think that if we consider what I was speaking of a few moments ago in resolving the energy that is tying us to the underworld, the metabolization process is just another metaphor to use in recognizing that. And it also helps to tie into our physical system, which gives us, I think our body is so beautiful in bringing forth spiritual awareness and wisdom. And so we notice that anything that we take into our body needs to go through that natural process of digesting. We have to chew it, we have to swallow it, it has to, we're going to assimilate what's needed for our system, and we're going to eventually let go of the waste, hopefully, if we have a healthy digestive system. Trauma is similar to that too. When we take it in energetically, even if it wasn't something that we wanted to consciously chew and eat, and even if it was an experience that was beyond our control, we've still taken it into our system. So it still needs to be respected and regarded as intended to move through that metabolization process. What so often happens on an energetic level, I notice, is that it gets stuck in people's bellies. It seems to be a really big one with trauma. I often would do hands-on healing back in the days of having a hands-on practice. And I'd find as soon as I'd place my hand on somebody's belly, the response of their energy system, and when I would invite them to share with me what they were noticing in that part of their body, it was almost always where their grief or trauma was hanging out. It was almost always connected to pain, that tears that hadn't been shed, anger that hadn't come forth. So the metabolization process of trauma is simply our own individual way of holding space for what our body needs to draw forth the nutrients that could be inherent inside of the pain. And now, if we're first to jump to the nutrients, then that would be similar to what I was saying earlier, right? Of not wanting to watch the thunderstorm. We just want the light show. And so but knowing that they are there. Somehow there's nutrients in this. I don't know, my hands are on my belly right now and I'm rubbing it. And so somehow there's nutrients in this. And there's also this piece of energy that's keeping me stuck. What does my body need in order to begin to break some of that down? And simply listening. So it's involving your body in your self-inquiry process. It's using your body as a map for your journaling. That your body's involved in that it's not something happening to you. You are an active participant in that conversation that you're having with your stomach, or maybe it's your large intestine, wherever you're noticing that it's stuck, and recognizing, is there any pieces of this that I can let go of today? Is there anything that I'm ready to release? And our bodies tend to have quick responses where it'll say, I'm not letting go of that. Nope. If it's something that you're angry about, that the anger hasn't been spoken to, we're going to hold that. And so that would be a way to speak to it, where it includes that journal process. It includes the felt sense awareness of what's happening inside the physical body. And again, being with what's uncomfortable, but with conscious intention, and allowing it to move you forward in an organic process that's authentic.
I think what that brings up, Sarah, is then the place of vulnerability and courage. Because I feel like inevitably when you do venture into this honest sort of dialogue with your body and the wisdom held within, you're going to come across really uncomfortable places where it's going to be against your natural instincts at that moment to say, yes, bring it on. And instead, no, I'm not touching that. Or no, this is not within my comfort zone and I'm not going there. So in your experience, where's the place of vulnerability and courage and the importance of those within this process?
I think that's a really important question, is to be conscious of that for ourselves individually, and to call in the help that we need to create a safe container to address it. Because I came from such an independent punk rock attitude in looking at my own healing, it took me many years before I had the courage to ask for help. Potentially because some of the help that I asked for that came from a more Western medical approach wasn't helpful. And so that could be some of what held me back. And I needed to be able to be seen by other people that in a sacred space where I could go into my own vulnerability. I do believe that is really important for our healing, to have other people who can hold us And of course, then it's having the courage to trust them and to trust that you can be seen falling apart and you can be, and it's safe and it's okay to do so. So I noticed that there's a part of where we have to surrender to a fear of it, whether or not it's going to be safe enough, right? That there's certain tenets that we can put in place. And as humans, we're all fallible. So there's definitely people that have helped me through my process of healing where I wouldn't work with them ever again. And they were amazing, you know, and it was beautiful at the time. And there's some that are hanging out in my heart and will be forever. So I think it's really important that we recognize that we need to help each other in the healing process. We can address our trauma to an extent ourselves. And a lot of the work I include in my book is to support people in doing that themselves. And we also need each other. We need other healers. We need other points of view. They help us to practice our own capacity to be our own authorities and set our own boundaries. And we also need to be able to move into our vulnerability and trust that when we're calling in, and when I say calling in, I'm not just like pick up your phone and make the call. I'm talking about you're using your relationship with spirit to say, hey, I need help here. Help guide me to some healers or helpers or support where I can really go into that deep vulnerability. I believe that grief and trauma need a community to heal.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
totally agree with that. Where I think the worry for a lot of people when they've had a lot of trauma and when they do start to connect to it, it becomes overwhelming really quickly. And at least from my experience working with people is that they don't want to touch into it. They know they need to feel it, but there's a big fear around feeling it because they almost feel like if they start to feel it, it's going to spiral out of control and it's going to trigger another big flare up. Where's the boundaries around that as far as how much is enough to start to do it? How do you kind of know to go into it, but to not go too far at a certain point in time? That sort of dynamic, how do you navigate that?
I think that's a funny question for me, because if I'm to look at myself historically, I'm a jump right in, all the way into the dark, hang out there for as long as I possibly have to, because freedom is such an important value to me. So I value freedom more than I value the fear of something being painful. So I think that we can, as individuals, we can apply a lot of that self-inquiry to our fear of what if it hurts so much. And so eventually it comes to a point in our own evolution where the question is, okay, I'm still holding this because I keep just putting my foot in the water. So do I want to just keep putting my foot in the water, or do I want to go for it? And if I was to go for it, what do I need in place to go for it? And posing the question from that point of view, because each one of us can recognize whether or not the work that we're doing is having an impact on our own transformation. And if we're stuck after a year, after 2 years, after 3 years, after 4 years of seeking help with somebody, then we need a different approach. Now, it is important to note that when we're in an acute state of trauma, that's not the fix it, let's do our self-inquiry, let's, contemplate transformation. I was speaking with a client of mine who just lost a grandson to homicide a few weeks ago, and a couple of others who were shot. And so our conversation was around, this is a time of support. This is a time of bringing forth what is needed just to get through 5 minutes, to get through the next hour, to get through the next day. When it is a time for healing, that comes organically. We start to notice inside of our own beings. And so 2 things. If somebody's not ready for it, it could be too acute, right? It could be too close to having happened. Or some more personal inquiry or questionings to look at the fear of why they only want to put their feet in the water each time. And I've had that experience many times with clients where, 10 years later, I'm like, gosh, that same issue is still there. And for whatever reason, sometimes it's just so hard for some to jump into it. And so knowing that at some point, often we just got to jump in and trust.
When you were speaking earlier on like the microcosm of of this process, I feel like that's the macrocosm comes into play at this point now too. Like when we're looking around us, and we're all collectively being pushed and triggered and tweaked in all sorts of different ways. But ultimately, our circumstances, our interactions, the reality around us is becoming so in your face and so amplified that if there were any hidden or dormant traumas laying within the inner terrain, it's going to be called upon within this time. It's going to be rising up to the surface for us to be able to do something with it. So even aside from the inhibitions that kept us back from seeing things clearly or wanting to work with them, this current time in our history as a humanity is beckoning us to come forth.
I think so, on a collective level. That being in this space of the underworld, there isn't the choice of whether we just put our feet in the water, right? We're in it. And so allowing for the beauty of it, which is that there are all of these unspoken or unacknowledged shadows from our individual or our collective history that are rising up to the surface for us to look at them. And, you know, many times in this past year, I've had to regroup and recenter and make a really conscious decision of I'm going to come from love, and I'm going to come from a place that feels present and rooted in, that's not lost in the chaos. I think there's so much chaos happening around us right now that it's the chaos that divides us, and it's the chaos that becomes the moot point that prevents us from transforming. You know, it's kind of like all of this static energy, and the higher picture is up here that comes from a place of clarity. And we're all in this really busy place here. Whereas if we can pause and breathe and stop for a moment, we can feel and see the perspective that arises from up here, right? But this chaos energy is really sneaky, and it's really tricky, and it's really easy for it to get into us and tell us that this is the actual problem. I don't think this is related to the problem. You know, I think that it becomes the problem because then we end up not being able to see each other, and we focus more on what divides us rather than how are we going to take care of the bigger picture, like the issues that we need to tend to on our planet. How are we going to take care of what we want to move forward as far as community, or growing our own food, or focusing on our health and wellness. So it's a funny time.
Mm-hmm. Well, and kind of in light of that with the chaos, I feel like the chaos creates a lot of confusion, and then we tend to, at least what seems to me is that in confusion, you sort of send your power away outside of yourself. You give it easily to other authorities to kind of make decisions that you're not really taking it personally. You're not owning your own power, which kind of brings me to another question for you around the idea of personal power, and what does it actually mean when we reclaim? What does it mean when we reclaim our own personal power again? What does that mean? What does it feel like? How does someone know when they've done that?
That's a good question. I think, and I'm pausing in it, perhaps because I tend to come from such a diplomatic space, recognizing that in many ways it's different for each human, that experience of reclaiming our power. However, the attributes perhaps that are similar for all of us is a deep awareness that we're responsible for our lives. So the experience of reclaiming our power means that somehow on some level, we've also co-created everything that shows up in our lives. And if we've co-created what's shown up in our lives, even the experiences of powerlessness, then we get to have a say in how we address these issues. We get to be accountable for how these issues are solved because we have power. So when we're in a state where we don't feel like we have a role to play in what has come to pass in our lives, we are coming from a place of powerlessness. As soon as we start to recognize and reclaim our stories that we're not the authority of our own lives, then we can make the steps towards, okay, if I am one of my twin daughters calls it the main character. If I'm the main character in my life, she's 21, then what does that main character do? Right? How does she live? And what does that look like? And so it's very much, again, back to basic personal growth techniques and understandings, is that reclaiming our power means self-responsibility and self-accountability. And so when we're in that place, the beauty of it is we can create anything we want. The difficulty of it is we're likely going to have things in our lives that come from choices that we made unconsciously that we don't like, that we're going to have to tend to. Like, think of all of the people in the course of the past year that have moved or that have made drastic changes because they've been sitting with themselves for long enough to recognize that whatever choices led to being in the job or in the city or in the relationship that they're in don't actually come from what they want. Right? They've sat with themselves for long enough. So that's a place of reclaiming our power. When we're sitting with ourselves and we recognize our power, we can make conscious decisions about what to draw into our lives and how we want that to unfold.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So well worded. Mm-hmm. Do you have any question there?
I think just maybe final thoughts or any messages.
I've got one more that I'd like to ask that was and this one comes up a fair bit around around projecting our fears. And for all of us to understand how do we know when we are projecting our fears onto other versus when those fears are legitimate? And how to sort of discern that difference.
Okay. So I think my best reference point to speak to that would be to pull from an instance in my child raising, because I reference it in my book as well. And this was a really poignant one. When my twin daughters were about 3, we started to have conversations about stranger danger. And, I realized that part of being a parent, or I thought was, making sure that they knew that they had to be conscious that there was bad guys or bad people out there that might hurt you, and that you couldn't, just go up to anybody. And I came to a place where I saw that some of how I was sharing with them wasn't just common sense. It also came from my deep, profound fear that somebody would take them. I became aware of that somebody, I knew bad people could take your loved ones. A bad guy had taken my mom. And so what if a bad guy took my daughters? And the thing with having twins, when I'd go out somewhere with them, they'd both run in different directions simultaneously, so it would be like, so I tended to just take them to fields where I knew I could catch them. And so a really important piece with that would be, I recognize the feeling inside of myself. I'm often asking, is this true? When I say something, is this true? I connected to a spiritual teacher called Gangaji when I was in my early 20s, shortly after my mother had been killed. And she was really helpful for me. And so the energy of truth has a feeling in our bodies. And so as a parent, when I'd be saying this and I'd be asking, is this true? I knew it wasn't 100% true. I knew that it was coming from, some part of me was actually afraid of what might happen And even though I knew that could happen, I also recognized that I got to choose how I lived my life. And was I going to be living my life in fear of what might happen? Or was I going to live my life celebrating what was here? And so as a parent, obviously, I could teach them simple things like, hey, don't get into cars with anybody you don't know. You know, don't take food from strangers. But how often really are people actually offering food to your kids, right? It was like I was repeating stuff that had been shared with me also from my parents, or that was coming from the overculture. And this was really confusing to my twins, who had been taught, you know, just we're really friendly with other people. So they were like, who are these bad guys? You know, why would they take us? You know, and so it was through that act of their questions and me being conscious of my response to them that I could be real with what was a projection and what was true. And that applies, I think, to all of us with any of our unresolved fear body or our pain body, is that when that fear is hanging out there, you start to notice it in how you are responding to something. It will be constrictive. It will be heavy. You know, I get it here too. It's not coming from a neutral nervous system. You know, you're tightening up. And so I think we can be conscious of it again. If we use our body as a compass, it will lead us, all of us. Our sovereignty is connected to our physical body. It'll lead us in a good way. We're also able to say, you know, am I afraid because there's actually the lion chasing me? Or am I afraid because this is a story of a lion who did come once upon a time? And that's another way to reference it too, that is helpful, that when there was a lion once upon a time, which in this case, you know, using that analogy in reference to my mother's homicide, I was now creating another story of what if it happened again. And so it comes down to, how do we want to live our lives? Do we want to live our lives from that place of, if I park in a parkade, somebody's going to kill me? No. I might avoid parkades. Like if there's an outdoor parking lot, I'm going to choose that. However, if I have to park in a parkade, I'm parking in a parkade. So it can be that simple sometimes.
Mm-hmm. I love the part of asking the body,
Mm-hmm.
asking yourself, is this true? And probably spending some time slowing things down enough so that you actually genuinely can connect to what that feeling actually is in your body. So you've got this template that you can come back to at different times. You know, it's like this sort of litmus test that you can always come back to know where you are within your own guidance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I like that analogy of the litmus test. That's exactly it, right? And then we're our own barometer.
Yeah.
So it's that real, and so often I've often had clients, and I'm sure you have too, that don't know how to feel. There's so much numbing and there's so much overculture stories that it's like there's this kind of veil on top of their bodies or in their being, where they're not sure what the right face is to put on, or the right, how to respond to any given situation. And so if that is where somebody is in their experience, to slowly use practices and tools that start to teach the body, and you might be having to rewire from pre-birth, so start to teach the body that feeling is safe and that you're allowed to have your own natural response.
Yeah, so wonderful, Sarah. I really, really enjoy having our conversations. I feel like there's so much light and so much wisdom in your book, and so much value. I mean, it really covers a lot of stuff. And these are such fun conversations for us to have too, and just be able to share this with our communities. So,
Sarah, I think even as so your book, Trauma as Medicine, can you like maybe offer the listeners and the audience 3 steps that they can begin today in order to open up to the possibility of healing their trauma? Just a lot of the things that you had already mentioned will, I'm sure,
big take-home steps.
Yeah. Just as a reminder for everyone.
Absolutely. I think one of the first pieces is to start having a conversation with your trauma. To imagine that you're able to recognize that this is hanging out somewhere inside my body. So if this is hanging out somewhere inside of my body, what does it need from me right now today that could be loving and gentle and kind to know that I acknowledge that it's there. I think that's maybe the simplest first step. I'm just going to acknowledge that it's there, and even use your hands. I'm going to put my hands on wherever this is hanging out inside of my body in a way that is loving and kind and compassionate. I don't have to fix it right now. That's going to cause overwhelm. I don't have to even do anything other than I'm just noticing that it's here. That would be the first most important step. The second step would be to say, okay, so this is hanging out inside of my heart right now. If I was to give you something, trauma hanging out inside of my heart, what would it be? What would you need from me right now? Keeping it, again, really simple. And thirdly, is there a movement that I could offer you? Trauma hanging out inside of my belly, trauma hanging out inside of my heart, wherever it is. Is there a movement, or maybe even a sound? But it could just be a really simple movement, maybe just a swaying of the body, maybe if it's in the shoulder. Is there a little movement, something subtle that I could do right now just to become conscious that this energy of trauma has a voice, it has something it needs from you, and you have power in creating a conscious relationship with it to support it in moving forward. So 3 very simple things. And then of course, there's, if you want to jump right into the underworld, read my book.
Yeah. And we, Sarah's so graciously given, I think we've got like 10, I think, free ebook giveaways, I think. So what we are going to do is look on the, we'll put that up on the different social media platforms. We'll do a free giveaway sort of prize for everybody. So I think we'll have it set up where share the video and tag it, and the first 10 people that do that we'll send out the links for the free Apple book.
And aside from Sarah's wonderful book, which we highly recommend, again, there's so much content. We ourselves are still working through it as well. There's so much really great content and information and bite-sized pieces that you can really start to digest as you go through your own process. But, just share these, please do share all these talks. It helps the algorithm to even like the content. All of our guests are volunteering their time, and it's for the benefit of humanity. And that's why, essentially, truly, this is all the ultimate reason as to why we're all doing this. We believe that this is in the highest good to be sharing this information, to be doing our part and what we can on a personal level to do our personal work, but also to share what we find to be highly valuable with everyone, so that we can all collectively rise up to a different way of being, perceiving, interacting, and holding one another.
So thank you all, and thank you for tuning in. Thank you for all the people, all the comments that were left, and look on the social media platforms for the free giveaway for the book. Okay?
And Sarah, any final thoughts from you? Anything that you wanted to mention before we sign off?
Just that I'm deeply grateful for being invited to speak and to be a part of this platform that you guys are creating. I think that it is so important right now with the diversity of speakers that you have and all of the opportunities for people to delve into their own healing. So thank you.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.